Hello, my name is Kelsey Camps, and today I will be discussing the WorldCom fraud that occurred in 2002. WorldCom is a telecommunication business that was founded in 1983 and originally started out as long-distance discount service. It has went through many changes and mergers since its initial beginning. It is still technically in operation today. It went through a bankruptcy in 2002, letting go of 17,000 people in total, and in 2006 it was bought by Verizon and is still currently owned by them today. The company was on a rise, showing a very high profit during the dot-com bubble, specifically 1994 through 1998. But in 1999, they saw the first quarter earnings report at a very low rate due to competition. This earnings report showed that the profits that WorldCom had been seeing in the past years suddenly on a decrease, and the CEO and CFO not wanting to see the stock price drop, they did the only thing that they could think of, which was to fabricate the financials. There are three people that are at fault for this fraud. First, there is Scott Sullivan, the CFO, David Myers, the controller, and Bernie Ebbers, the CEO. Now let's talk about how the fraud occurred. The CFO, Scott Sullivan, instructed David Myers, the controller, to fabricate some of the balance sheet entries, just until the next quarter when they can rectify them, is what the CFO said. This, however, was not the case, and in the second quarter they had to make even more of the false entries to cover up that of the first quarter. They had to do this in the third quarter as well, but however, this was not enough to make the profits look as good as the CEO, Bernie Ebbers, and the CFO, Scott Sullivan, wanted. This meant that they would have to come up with a new way to make the profits look good. This is where they came up with recharacterizing certain expenses as capital assets. This meant that they would have overstated their assets. They ultimately put the expense of renting telephone lines down as an asset rather than an expense, as it should have been. With frauds, it always seems to start with something small and continually grow until it is found out or it becomes very outrageous. This is very apparent in this fraud as well. Now I will go over how the fraud was uncovered. Cynthia Cooper, who was an internal auditor for WorldCom, found the incorrect balance sheets entries. She brought this to Arthur Andersen, their external auditing firm, and this was shot down and told to be correct, and that it would be balanced out on a corporate basis. Cynthia was also called by Scott Sullivan, letting her know to only deal with his channel rather than going to Arthur Andersen. Cynthia did not stop, and she is the one that led to the uncovering of the fraud. Now I will go over some of the effects of the fraud. Scott Sullivan, the CFO, teamed up with the government to testify against Bernie Ebbers and only got 5 years for his involvement with the frauds. He was released in 2009. David Myers, the controller, was sentenced to 1 year and 1 day for his involvement, as he helped cooperate with the government and is now a keynote speaker. Bernie Ebbers, the CEO, was sentenced to 25 years on 9 counts of security fraud. Both David Myers and Scott Sullivan testified against him. He was released late 2019 due to his health and then passed away early 2020. Arthur Andersen, the external auditors, said that they were misled by WorldCom, later convicted for their involvement in Enron, and then ultimately had to close down in 2002. KPMG took over as WorldCom's auditors. Due to this fraud and due to the Enron fraud that occurred just prior to this, the U.S. Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. This act helped businesses improve their financial management by strengthening controls, standardizing processes, improving documentation, and creating stronger board oversight. Many people bought WorldCom stock for their retirement and for their pensions. This would ultimately be a giant mistake, as the total loss due to the downfall of WorldCom would be estimated at $175 billion. Overall, the fraud was thought to be $3.8 billion, but it turned out that this was just the amount that was fraudulent due to the balance sheet entries. The actual fraud ended up totaling $11 billion due to the overstated assets. Here are all of my sources. Thank you for listening to my presentation about WorldCom.